Hi everyone. This is Friday 15 at 2:15 with the Center for Environmental Education and Discovery. My name is Tom Pelletier. I'm on the board of directors and I'm filling in today for Ranger Eric, who normally does this on Friday. This is a new series we've started, and it's basically 15 minutes of hopefully fun nature information every Friday afternoon. And I'm going to apologize in advance because I have had more technical difficulty than I planned on. So I had a whole slideshow PowerPoint thing that I was hoping you could see, but really it's a little hard to see. So you're gonna have to bear with me, and I will do the best I can. But anyway, we will start right in. I'm going to talk about the frogs that we have on Long Island, and the fact that this is the time of year when they all start singing. Very soon anyway. None of them I don't think have started just yet, but probably we will hear spring peepers pretty soon, and possibly wood frogs if you live in the kind of swampy areas that wood frogs like. So I'm going to start with the wood frog because this is one of the earliest, probably the earliest one you will hear on Long Island, and I hope you can see this picture, but it's a small frog about 2 inches or so. You don't see them that often. Because they're pretty, they're not sort of in the ponds when people, in the summertime when people are in the ponds. But the identifying thing about these guys is this sort of black or dark brown area right behind their ear. And I was trying to think of ways that could remind people of how to identify these frogs. So if you think about that dark brown mark, it's sort of like a walnut color. So if you think of walnut and wood, you'll remember that the wood frog has that sort of walnut slice of brown right beneath its eyes. And I'm going to play the song for the hopefully this is going to work. And you'll hear that sort of duck quacking sound. That's what a wood frog sounds like, that kind of duck quacking. And when there's a whole bunch of them, it really is kind of funny because it sounds like a bunch of ducks, quarreling or talking. Actually, I always think it sounds a little bit like talking, ducks talking. So if you want to think about another way to sort of remember that sound, if you hear that duck quacking sound in a marsh somewhere, just think of a bunch of ducks, duck carpenters, building things out of wood. Something like that. Sometimes just thinking of crazy things like that helps you remember. So, all right, so that's the wood frog. That is one of the ones we should hear pretty soon. And then the other one, the next one, oops, not going to show. Sorry, 1 second. Okay, there it is. There's this is the spring peeper. This is the sort of famous one of springtime in most of the eastern United States. It's usually the first one you'll hear, and it does have a peep sound. It's a very small frog. It's only about 1 inch long. And the way to remember, or the identifying mark on these guys, is an X across their back. You can see that here if you look closely. There's an X on their back. The one way to think about that, maybe, or remember that, is that sometimes these guys are so loud that people just that they drive people crazy. So you want to X them off your favorite animal list. So here's the spring peeper. Now the funny thing is, you can hear that individual spring peeper. It's very loud and clear, and what that noise in the background is just hundreds of them. That sort of steady, high-pitched buzz is the sound of hundreds of other spring peepers singing along. So I'm going to play that again so you can hear the buzz in the background. And I had sort of a funny thing happen to me this spring because I thought that I heard a spring peeper back in January, and I was thinking to myself, I mean, I know our weather is getting crazy, but the idea that spring peepers would be starting in January is really absurd. But I kept hearing it, and I kept thinking, why are the spring peepers can't possibly be out that early? And then I finally realized it was not a spring peeper at all. It was a mockingbird imitating a spring peeper. So let me hear. I'll play that for you because I got a recording of that mockingbird this morning. Anyway, I hope you can hear that. And what's interesting about that is, and the way you can tell that it's a mockingbird, is the repetition of 3. Because actually spring peepers only peep once, and that mockingbird keeps doing a peep, peep, peep. And that's very indicative of mockingbirds, which almost always repeat their song 3 times. So I should have known sooner that that was not an actual peeper, that it was a mockingbird. So anyway, okay, moving on to this is, I hope you can see that. It's a little hard to see, maybe. That is a leopard frog. And it's one of 2 frogs that we have on Long Island and in most of the eastern United States that is considered to be a sort of a grass frog. You often find them in the grass near water, but not necessarily in the water. And they're very similar. It's the leopard frog and the pickerel frog. They're both, you can find them both on Long Island, all across the Long Island. And anywhere where there's sort of grass and water usually. And the way to tell the difference between the 2, they look very similar. Let me see if I can show you. That's a pickerel frog, and this is a leopard frog. And the way you can tell them apart is that a leopard frog has sort of random sized and random shaped dots that kind of go all over it, and a pickerel frog has the same kind of dots, but they're often in almost a rectangle shape, and they're often in lines. So if you look at the back, I hope you can see that, but if not, you can look it up sometime. But if you look at they're almost like our little rectangles, and they go in 2 parallel lines on the back. So that's how you can tell it's a pickerel frog. And I was trying to think of a way for you to remember which one is which. And you can think of the spots on the leopard frog are sort of like spots on a leopard, which are certainly not rectangular. They're just kind of random. And the spots on a pickerel, if you know on the pickerel frog, if you know what a pickerel looks like, a chain pickerel, they kind of look like that. They're sort of rectangular. So I'm going to play the sound now of the leopard frog first. So it's a kind of a chattering sound, and I'm sorry I have to keep going off the screen here, but let me hang on one second. Maybe if I move that a little closer, there, should have had that figured out. Anyway, okay, pickerel frog, I will play that one for you. People describe the pickerel frog sound as being almost like snoring. So again, I'm trying to think of ways to remember those, so just to help you out. So if you think of the sort of chattering sound of the leopard frog. Oops. You can think of a bizarre image of leopard chattering. And then the pickerel frog, just to have a crazy image of it, think of a fish sleeping underwater and snoring. Okay, moving on. The next up is the American toad. Which, interestingly, I always assumed that the toads that we have here are American toads. American toads are the toads I've seen most of my life. They're the toads all through the eastern United States for the most part. the most common toad in the eastern United States. But there's another toad that actually looks very similar. It's very hard to tell apart, and also found throughout the East. And for some reason, the American toad is only found in the very far western parts of Brooklyn and Queens on Long Island. So all the rest of Long Island does not have, has no recorded instances of the American toad. And instead, what we have is the Fowlers toad, which I'll show you in a second, and you can see they're very similar. But the American toad, and they're both about the same size. So here's the Fowlers toad. And even these pictures are deceptive because one is kind of lighter than the other. But really, they look almost exactly the same. There are ways to tell them apart by counting the bumps in each wart. Like I think it's that the Fowlers toad has 3 bumps and the American toads have 2 or something like that. But we won't worry about that. If you see a toad like this, it's either an American toad or a Fowlers toad. And if you're on Long Island, it's more likely to be a Fowlers toad, which was surprising to me. The easiest way to tell them apart is by their song, actually. So here is the song of an American toad. You'll notice that it goes on for a long time and then it all of a sudden stops. The Fowler's toad, which again is the one that we have for the most part on Long Island, sounds like this. Somewhat similar, very similar, but it only ever lasts for about 3 seconds and then cuts off sharply. Whereas again, the American toad can go on for as much as 15 seconds. So if you hear these guys and you hear that high trill, loud trill, you just sort of notice how long it goes on. If it seems kind of short and then it's done, that's a Fowler's toad. If it goes on for 10 seconds or more, it's definitely an American toad. Otherwise, again, they're very similar, eat the same things, they're about the same size. Okay, next up will be the gray tree frog. I love these guys. It's always fun to find one of these. I can't see that picture very well, but they're very compact. They pull their legs in, and they just look like a little tiny lump. And they are amazingly well camouflaged, and they can actually do a sort of a chameleon type thing where they, take on the colors of the background. In fact, I have more than once in my life put my hand on one because I didn't realize it was there. It was so well blended into, the tree bark. Or one time I was actually up on a roof doing some work on a chimney, and there was a tree frog on the cement of the roof of the chimney. Completely looked like cement, so that I put my hand right on it, which was kind of funny. They have a very distinctive song, which I will play for you. And one of the things I think is kind of interesting about them is that you almost always hear them calling back and forth to each other. So that one of those, the one that's really loud, is clearly closer to whoever had the microphone, and the other ones are further away, but they're always sort of calling back and forth to each other like that. I'll play that again for a second. So a sort of mnemonic device for remembering them is to, I think of them as they're saying like, my tree, my tree, my tree, my tree. So you can think of them calling from the trees like that to each other, and that's what tree frogs do. These guys are about 2 inches, maybe a little less. And again, they can be anything from green to, dark gray. So we don't call them green frogs because there is another frog called the green frog that we don't have on Long Island, but he's very starkly green, very lime green and hard to miss. But okay, so speaking of green, the next frog is the green frog, which is a large pond frog. And looks very much like a bullfrog, and is often sort of mistaken for a bullfrog. But there is, it turns out, a relatively easy way to tell them apart. I wish this picture was bigger, but Both of them have something called a dorsolateral line, which is a bump that runs down starts from behind the eye and runs around the tympanium, which is this part here, it's sort of part of their ear. And then this line on a green frog runs all the way along the body like this. And you'll see in a minute on a bullfrog, it runs in a little loop around here. And that's one way to tell them apart. The other thing is that a bullfrog gets much bigger, but if you're looking at a small bullfrog or an exceptionally large green frog, that's not going to help you. I will play for you the song of the green frog. So I think of that as kind of like a bong sound that the green frog makes. The song of the bullfrog is actually more like this sort of cliche ribbit sound. Again, so here's the green frog. But again, they otherwise look very similar, and I will show you the picture here of a bullfrog. And if you can look real close, you'll see that that dorsolateral line doesn't extend to the body at all. It just curves right around here and goes down to its foot. So here's my little device for remembering which one is which. You can remember lime green, line green, being so that tells you that it's the green frog that has the line that goes along its body, like this one. And then the bullfrog has what almost looks like sort of drooping horns, like a bull. So if you can remember either one of those, you'll end up with knowing the right one. Okay, and then the last frog that I have, and I thank you very much for sticking with me through this whole thing, is a really weird one called an eastern spadefoot toad. And I've never seen one myself. They're not very common. They're fairly rare, but what makes them even harder to see is that they mostly live underground. They dig, and in fact, the reason that they're called a spadefoot is that they have a special adaptation, a sort of almost like a claw on their rear foot, on the underside of the pad of the foot, that helps them dig, helps them scrape dirt. And they spend a lot of time underground, so they're not very visible, and they're not very common either, so people don't see them. The other thing that's a little bit odd or a little interesting about them is, although they sort of look toad-like, they've got little warts and stuff, they're actually not related to those other toads, the American toad and the Fowlers toad, at all. They're really a sort of a toad-looking frog. So they're more frog-like than toad-like, really, but they just kind of superficially look like a toad. And they have a very interesting call. I don't know that I've ever heard this in the wild either, but I'll have to listen to it now that I know better what it sounds like. So that's been described as sounding a little bit like a baby crow. And that's kind of interesting. I think that's true. It does sound a little bit crow-like. I'll play that again. So anyway, if you're out walking around and you hear that sound, and it's not a crow, you may be where there are some spadefoot toads, which would be really interesting because they are not very common. And we do have them across Long Island, but they're not very common. All right, well, thank you very much. Thanks for joining me. I think we've done our 15 minutes here, and I've gone a little over. But anyway, thanks for bearing with my technical difficulties, and thank you for watching. Be sure to check back next week at 2:15 for Friday 15, and hopefully Eric will be back again next week and have something new interesting to talk about. So thank you very much, and have a good day.